G'day all. Now that I've had the sim for a couple of weeks and have got to put it through its paces, I thought it might be time for a no bullshit review for my fellow flight sim nerds. To sum it up quickly, for those with short attention spans, it's a fun game, but it isn't yet what I'd call a simulator. I caveat that though with a big yet. In time, with improvements and third-party developers getting on board, I'm sure it will get there. But right now, it isn't there. If you're interested in simulation and take your flight sim seriously, probably best to stick with Prepared or X-Plane for now. However, if you're new to flight simming or just want a fun and easy flying experience, then Microsoft's Flight Simulator 2020 is worth buying, even with its bugs and missing features. It's a great introduction to the flight sim hobby, and let's face it, it's pretty fun. Let's take a more detailed look now, shall we? Graphically, the sim is gorgeous. It's the most beautiful, straight from the box flight sim to date. The attention to detail is truly spectacular, though that does come at a cost. Like its predecessors, it will push the boundaries of PC hardware for years to come. That being said, with a mid-tier gaming PC, you can still have a great-looking, fluid sim. You'll just be missing some of the extra eye candy reserved for the more powerful hardware. On the game side of things, it has some fun and interesting challenges, activities and achievements to keep you trying new things, like bush trips and landing challenges. If you're not a nerdy simmer, there is aid and assistance available to make the experience as game-like and as easy as possible for you. Not quite dumbed down to GTA 5 level, but not that much more difficult either. So as a purely gaming activity, there should be something for everyone of all skill levels. As an actual flight simulator, rather than a game, it has some good points and some bad points. Its strongest good point has to do with its graphical fidelity to the real world. What this means is that VFR flying, that is, using visual flight rules, using landmarks, highways, terrain features and such for navigation, becomes a real possibility. No other sim yet does this as well. So if your gig is low and slow VFR with no fancy smancy GPS, just a sectional map and what's out your window for guidance, then Flight Simulator 2020 won't disappoint. It's pretty bloody good for that. Flying IFR on the other hand is a giant pain in the arse. So much to do with flying by instrument flight rules is either missing, incorrect or completely busted. The Garmin GPS units are woefully incomplete and only functional in the most basic things. Same for the MCDUs found in the airliners. VNAV isn't implemented yet, approaches, stars and SIDs don't always match their real world counterparts in some details, or are just missing, and many taxiways are lettered incorrectly. I could go on with more, but I won't. You get the point. It makes it very hard for the hardcore simmers who use real world charts to read and execute procedures. When it comes to this sort of thing, it is the worst sim on the market. Even its 10-year-old predecessor, FSX, is more accurate. The Atc system, whilst better than X-Plane's, is still a steaming pile of dog turd. It won't vect you into a mountainside like X-Plane will, but it will do stupid stuff like ask you to climb and maintain 16,000 feet when you're currently at 3,000 feet on approach to land. It has trouble vectoring you to waypoints, and its instructions also won't have you descend in time for landing, unless you drop like a rock out of the sky at 3,500 feet or more per second. I find if you want to use the Atc system, you have to guide it to where you are going, rather than have it guide you, which kind of defeats its purpose. So yeah, the Atc is really meh. So what about the aircraft then? The default aircraft are just like the default aircraft in every other sim. Pretty to look at, but otherwise shit. Half functional and act very little like their real world counterparts. You can just slam the throttle to full and be like, "Whee! Look at me! I'm airborne! I'm flying a plane!" That's not necessarily a negative though, as much as it sounds one, because it does give people new to the hobby something to cut their teeth with. The more hardcore of us though, the more hardcore simmers, or those wanting to use the sim as a training aid for actual real world flying, well, we're going to have to wait for third-party developers to create study-level planes. The good news is that the best in the business, A2A Simulations and PMDG, have indicated that they will be doing just that. So flight dynamics. Well, the flight dynamics seem to be okay. They don't feel to be quite at the same level as X-Planes, but they do feel a little better than Prepared's. So in other words, they seem to need a little bit of tweaking, but they're not too bad at all. And if you're going to call yourself a flight simulator, that's pretty important. Its ground handling though can be pretty sketchy. It takes a fair bit of power to get your aircraft taxiing at times, and when you do have some speed up, the runways often feel like they have ice on them. Dialing in the right sensitivity of your rudder pedals is a must, and it can take a little bit of time to get that just right. There are some other bigger issues too, like the modelling of the fuel to air mixture. The sim has you to lean fuel too aggressively and too early for max RPM. Overall though, the general flight dynamics and system modelling is at a good starting place. With some tweaking, which I'm sure is going to happen over time, it could actually be great. Time will tell how it goes though, we're just going to have to wait and see. As for bugs, there are shit tons. The sim has real world weather injected into it, but it's only working in some locations. A good part of the globe is permanently at winds blowing 3 to 5 knots at 245 degrees. Knobs are missing on some planes, and some click spots don't work on others. The planes that come with the premium deluxe version of the game are all pretty much screwed in one way or another. There are bugs in the autopilot systems, and for the gamers there are many achievements that are bugged. There's a list of problems far too long to go into, but the developers seem really keen to address them and work on them, and that's pretty encouraging for its future. They've already had one patch done which addressed some pretty major stuff, and second patch that's on its way which is addressing even more stuff, including some of the items that I've just mentioned right now, like the winds blowing all wrong. The biggest problems most people face though are performance issues. There is some weird stuff going on that makes even some high level PCs struggle with settings that they should be able to handle. Stuttering and pauses seem to be the biggest complaints from people. Not every rig is suffering from this, but there's enough that there is obviously a problem. There are systems way beefier than mine that are running far, far worse. Some of the causes have been identified, and hopefully with future patches things will iron themselves out. There are other people complaining because they can't get 60 frames per second on ultra settings in 4K, and so they reckon the optimization is shit. Most of those people, however, have probably never used flight sims before. If they had, they would know that a stable 30 frames per second is what most simmers aim for. There's a lot more going under the hood than your first person shooter, and it really taxes CPUs really bloody hard. It's not all about the GPU when it comes to flight sims. So when you hear about really bad performance of the sim, just remember that a good proportion of the complaints are from these guys. I'd consider my PC a mid-tier gaming rig. I have an i5 8400 CPU, an RTX 2060 GPU, and 32 gigs of RAM, and I'm pretty happy with the graphical result in the sim. You can see from the video that the eye candy is reasonably nice, that the frames are reasonably fluid. In fact, I get better performance out of Flight Simulator 2020 than any other sim I've used in the past, including my main sim, X-Plane 11. Performance drops a little bit in city areas, but that's to be expected. There's a lot going on there. But as you can see from this little jaunt in Sydney, it's still pretty playable. That being said, there is optimization that needs to be done, and Asobo Studios, they're aware of that. I kind of get the feeling that Microsoft had them rush this into the market, as it does kind of have a beta test feel to it still. So we're just going to have to give it time. Overall, I really like the sim. It can't replace X-Plane for me yet though, because it's still more of a game than it is a simulator. In about a year or so's time though, with some study level aircraft from third-party developers and some fine-tuning of the sim, it will probably become my go-to sim. There'll always be a place for X-Plane, as I don't think anyone can ever beat it for GA aircraft flight dynamics, but I predict that Lockheed Martin's Prepared will eventually become a dead platform. Once PMDG and A2A simulations have decent offerings in flights in 2020, there really will be no reason to stay on it. I mean, I can't think of any. If I was to score this sim out of 10, right now, I'd give it a solid 6. But I reckon it'll eventually become an 8. It's not there yet, but I believe, give it time, and it will. If you like this video, please smash the like button. I'd love to see what you think about the sim down in the comments. Let me know. Bye for now.